Jonathan, thank you for joining me today on a discussion of real estate, business, and global affairs. I want to start a little bit with some of the, with real estate specifically. I think real estate's a fascinating industry. I think some of the things that you've done are fascinating in real estate. And one way, real estate's one of the oldest businesses in the world. It's been around forever. In another way, we're watching real estate change constantly to how clients want to demand real estate, to capital markets. Just want to take a quick pulse check and say, what are you foreseeing in the real estate industry right now? From where we came from COVID to where we're going, what are some of your observations?
Well, hi, Matt. It's great to be with you. It's a big question to start off with. Start with the easy ones. Um, I think you first of all have to look back over the last few years. In British terms, I was dated by the Brexit vote, which is 2016. But in global terms, you really look at COVID, so March 2020 and thereafter, and you went through a period of 2 years, and then you went into the Ukraine war and then inflation. So the last 4 or 5 years have been very tough in the real estate industry. You've had a situation where there has been a dearth of capital coming in to the industry from an equity perspective. And that means values have suffered, and people have really had to survive through with the quality of their real estate. And if you didn't have quality real estate, which was income generating, you were challenged and put in a difficult position. I think the way we're looking forward at it now and the way that we look at it is that we've come out of that period, and we tried to say, okay, how should we focus our business and how should we be looking at real estate? And we've really looked at two quality types of asset that we feel are good for the future and good for the medium term. And the first one would be quality assets that people enjoy visiting, people enjoy spending time at and enjoy themselves at. Luxury assets at the top of their game, hence our investment with Amman, our investment in the Delano Hotel, Raffles and others. And the other asset class would be assets that help people live, that people need to survive, people need for their existence. Expediency. So you're looking really at industrial, at logistics, at data centers and the like, which are really so vital to the way in which we live our lives today. So I think real estate is changing. Real estate has changed a lot over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. And I think people really need to look at the asset class very differently now, because the way in which we live our lives, the way in which we operate has changed so fundamentally. The way in which we're communicating today, the medium you're using to broadcast this, the way in which people are looking to get information out, the way in which the political world has used this that information world in which to get people. That all comes back to what real estate is needed to service that world and service the future. And I think that's really the way we've tried to focus the business and where we see the opportunity in the coming years.
So a lot of investment it's a risk-reward trade-off as you're looking at different things. Let's specifically go on the luxury side for a second. You're always navigating geopolitical risk, you're navigating capital markets risk. What was the underlying business plan to say, I'm going to go ultra luxury, I'm going to go Amman, I'm going to go Beverly Hills? How did you go through that process?
I think if you look back since the global financial crisis, statistically, the rich have got richer during that 15 to 17 year period. And whilst we may not think that's great for social cohesion in the world, that has, however, been a fact. And coming out of COVID, people have looked for ever more experiences, ever more enjoyable opportunities to live their lives in comfortable surroundings. And we have saw that trend coming early. We positioned ourselves, obviously, in Beverly Hills, in one of the great centers of the world. And we've now developing a 17.5-acre site with an Amman hotel, with residences in a secure compound, with retail servicing and great food and beverage, because we're trying to provide a holistic experience to people who want to engage within that world. And we see great opportunity, provided you have the right real estate within great locations. The thing about Amman that is so attractive to us is if you go around the world and visit the Amman hotels, they are in unique locations in so many places in the world. Just a few weeks ago, I was in Japan. I visited the Amman in Kyoto. It's just a unique spot. It's a haven. It's an oasis. to which to enjoy your life, to take a breath from our busy, often overly hectic environments and existences. And what we've tried to do is focus on those areas of investment which can provide that unique experience. And I think if you tailor your investment strategy to that type of experience and that type of consumer, you're providing an opportunity which to give yourself great returns. And if you look at hotel rooms and average daily rates, ADRs achieved since before the pandemic, we all see it as we travel the world, right? Hotels are more expensive to stay in than they were 4 or 5 years ago, multiple times, because people are looking for these experiences and they're gravitating towards the quality. So we really have tried to focus on that quality experience. You know, you can be wrong by 200 yards, but be in the wrong location and not attract the right people. So we've really tried to focus on the best places. You know, our Delano Hotel is right in the center of Miami Beach, 17th and Collins. It's a great spot. It's iconic, and we can provide a unique experience to the consumers who wish to enjoy that. So I think that's really where we focused our attention and focused our investments. And it's shown a huge amount of resilience in both cash and value over the period. And we're, very excited to dive even further into that industry over the course of the next 3 to 5 years.
So if you and I were to walk into a 5-star hotel that neither of us had been into before, what would be your first observations? What are the things as you walk in, you check in, you go into a room that helps you go, this is a great hotel or a mediocre hotel, or this hotel needs help?
My wife, if she was sitting here, would say to you straight away, if someone says hello to you on the door, if someone greets you and makes you feel like you're entering your home, if someone understands who you are, treats you like a human being, and then you have that experience coming through. Now, of course, the physical space has to match that.
Right.
You have to have an environment that matches that. But ultimately, all businesses are people businesses. And how you're treated as a human being, both in the way in which you run your own business and in the way in which you want to treat your customers coming in, is hugely important to that process. We were at a hotel in DC a year or so ago, which purported to be a luxury top-class hotel. And no one spoke to you. The doors were dirty when you turned up at the front door. Just little things you notice when you get to a hotel. And then you lose it. From the minute you've walked in through the front door, you've lost it already. So I think if you're playing in that world, you have to have a constant experience through the whole process, whereby you're treating the people who you wish to entertain as if you're coming in your own home.
So a theory that I have and that we employ at Chatham is effectively that this idea of 5-star service is not just for hotels anymore. That since COVID, I'm going to take this into the business world, that we keep seeing, doesn't matter if it's our employees, if it's our clients, if it's our vendors, that everyone in the world is having their taste upgraded to say, I want 5-star service. I don't want to come to an office where my coworkers don't know my name, or I don't want to call up to a service provider who doesn't know my name. Have you observed similar things like that in your business, and how would that affect you?
I think if you speak to the people who work for me and with me over years, that there's 2 things that I talk about all the time.
Okay.
The first one is to create an environment in which people can maximize their potential. Something which is really, really important to me. It's important to me in my own personal career and otherwise. But the second point, which comes back to your point, is to treat people the way that you would want to be treated yourself. And that's an environment that I've tried to create within every business, from the law and into the real estate world, that I have run. And I think it goes to the heart of my corporate philosophy about the way in which you do deals and the way in which you treat people. You want to actually live your life as if you're walking in the other person's shoes.
Right.
And it comes from my favorite book from when I was a kid, To Kill a Mockingbird, where Atticus Finch says to the kids, you can't live your life until you walk in that other person's shoes. And I think that's the way I've tried to operate my own business and try to treat people within my business. And it's the way I've tried to treat negotiations in the same way. I've, for many, many, many years, when I was in the law, if people marked up a document, I used to say to them, well, if you sent that to the other side, how would you feel if you received it? I do the same now. I try and negotiate in a way, and try and get my people to negotiate in a way whereby we are trying to put forward a fair position. We are not a pulverizing environment. That's not the way I wish my business to be. And that's the way I want to treat people in my own business. And that's the way I want other people to treat each other within the business. Now, that doesn't mean to say you don't have to make clinical decisions from time to time. We all do. We all have standards that we have to uphold. But if you start from the premise that you're going to treat your colleagues the way that you'd want to be treated, and treat your counterparties and your partners the way that you would want to be treated, I think you'll go a long way.
So one of your influences to that worldview is To Kill a Mockingbird and Atticus and Scout. What are some of the other influences that helped you evolve into this type of thinking?
Well, I think that I grew up in an environment where I underachieved probably in the early part of my academic career, certainly at school. And I got to a point in time when I sort of had to take stock and say to myself, you know what? You're not doing yourself justice. And this became a constant challenge for me in maximizing potential.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big sporting fan. And I look at some of the great sporting heroes of our time, be it in just football, tennis, golf. And, to get to the top of an industry or top of a sport is really hard. Imagine Roger Federer's ascent to world number one and look at his chart and then say, good Lord, how hard he has to work to keep there, how he's working every day to maximize that potential. And I've tried to operate my own life with a similar sort of philosophy. I'm a bit older now, so I'm trying to rein in that madness because it can drive you a little crazy. But, you're always challenging yourself to try and understand how you can do things better, how you can be both a better person, better businessman, maybe a better father, better husband. How can you do things better? And I think that's an environment and a culture that I've tried to create. And it comes from my own background because, my parents, who are sadly not with us anymore, created an environment in my own family which encouraged us to express ourselves, encouraged us along a certain road. But they didn't come at it from an academic background. My father was in the dress business and my mother worked along with him with my grandfather. It was very much a family business in the East End of London. But it was very much an environment to say, you know what, the world is out there for you to achieve, express yourself, feel confident in doing that, and try to take that through, my business life.
Okay, so the rumors are that you applied and got denied to university 5 different times. I imagine it is this drive that your parents gave you that kept you going. I want to talk a little bit about your career. So you get finally into university. I believe you're the first person in your family to go. What made you then go from university? How did you choose law, and why would you choose law?
Well, I grew up in an environment, as I said, that was a very warm environment, but non-academic. But I had an uncle who was in the law, and he was the one who was most respected within our wider community, Uncle Raymond. And so I thought, you know what, people like him, they respect him, and I'll follow him. So I went and worked and did some internships in a law firm, quite liked it. I got rejected from university a few times as part of that process, but I had a teacher who clearly didn't like me very much. And in those days, there wasn't the transparency that there is today. So, you applied for law, but if you didn't have the predicted grades, you were really wasting your time. So I had to get the results, prove them wrong, show that determination to get the results, in spite of the predictions, and then go with my results and wave them under the university's noses and say, you know what, I'm actually okay. Will you let me in? Which is what I did. I rang up the University of Manchester and spoke to the then dean, whose name was Margot Brazier. Somehow got through on the phone to her. And it wasn't like today with easy communications with mobile phones, as you'll recall. And she said, well, if you're interested, come up tomorrow. So I went up to Manchester, and 10 days later, I started university. And when I look back today, I mean, I was pretty shocked at the time that I was having these blockages because, you think you're innately talented. But I think it was a good sign to me that, you needed to knuckle down, you needed to work hard, you needed to do the basics to enable the rest to flourish. That was a good lesson to me early in life. It was a bit of a wake-up call.
And your career at the law firm is interesting because you achieved becoming partner, I think, at 28 and CEO of a law firm at 32, which is almost unheard of in the law industry. What are some of the unique strengths that you have that allowed that to happen?
When I was 17 years old, I was chosen by a youth group in in the UK to go and do a Camp America.
Okay.
To go and do a leadership course in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, in deepest Pennsylvania. And there was a phrase that I learned on that course that stayed with me the whole of my life, which is risk hostility. In other words, they taught you when I was 17 years old that in order to get by and get on as a leader, you had to risk hostility, which I took to mean that if I have an opinion, provided I express it in the right way, respectfully, but forcefully, provided I'm evidentially backed up by my opinion, and also that I'm prepared sometimes to admit that, okay, I'm wrong on that one, then that was the way forward for me as a human being. So I've never been afraid to express my opinions. And I think what happened in the law firm was that the law firm itself was going through a period of change from the founder, a man called Simon Olswang, who I'm still in contact with today. And there weren't other people who were prepared to get up on the stage with him and express those opinions and say, you know what, actually, I think this is the way forward. And I do look back and I marvel at partners in their 40s and 50s and think, wow, you let this young whippersnapper, have a go at running your business and gave him authority. But I have to say, from day one, they backed me. And I was really unchallenged in that role between 1997 and when I left in May of 2007, when I decided I needed to maximize my potential and challenge myself in another arena. And I do admire them. And when I look around in my own business and I look around in analogous businesses that we've either invested in or that we're involved in, I don't see a great adoption of that same culture that I was the beneficiary of back in Olswang in 1997. If I see the opposite,
Right.
He's too young, she's too young, she needs more experience. And I often say to people, you know what, if I was with you back then, I wouldn't be me, because I was lucky that I had partners who actually were prepared to open up their minds and say, okay, this guy, he brings something different to the table. Let's give him a crack. I think there's a lot of resistance. And I think as businesses have got bigger, and I look at the accountancy firms and the law firms today, and you have to go through all these so many years to make this level and that level. And it's the same in the investment businesses, in the large, the top 5, 6 investment businesses in the world. And, you see these hierarchies. I see the hierarchy in my own business, which I don't always like. And I say, you know what? We've got to create an environment in which talent can shine through. So if you're an associate and you're fantastic, I have no problem pushing you straight through to vice president or whatever title you might want to use, even if that's 3 rungs higher, because it's important that you maintain that meritocracy, you retain that edge whereby you can attract and retain the best talent. And I was the beneficiary of that, and I'm trying to make sure that we run a business that would reward a Jonathan Goldstein at the age of 28 or 32. And that's hard.
So we both have been the beneficiaries of that. And I can tell you from my perspective, especially when I talk to young people inside of our firm and outside of our firm, I always want to make sure that we have that business where the talent can rise to the top. There really is a meritocracy. Occasionally I run into 22 or 23-year-olds who think that 24 months is like an eternity. They're like, no, think more in 5-year periods. A 5-year period seems a long ways away when you're 22, but actually you can accomplish it. In a good company, you can accomplish a lot in a 5-year period. And I'm with you. The hierarchies are almost stifling to innovation. Like the companies that have really large hierarchies, you're just not surprised that they can't do new things.
I try and reach across that in the way I manage a business. And that I try and give roles to people who I think are super talented and give them judgments, which maybe other people wouldn't do. I did it recently. We have to make a very, very big decision on a certain asset. And I reached out to one of our associates and I said to her, I want you to go to Dubai on your own and come back, and whatever opinion you come to, we're going to follow. Whatever judgment you come to about a certain aspect, we're going to follow your opinion. And she wrote us a big long report, and we followed that opinion.
I like that.
So that's something that I'm trying to do all the time, trying to find the right people to do that with, to empower them. Because I think if you empower them, there's a level of risk involved, but you're going to get people really developing, and people feel more attached to your business and to you as human beings because they feel connected to that decision-making process. They feel trusted, and it innovates people, I believe.
Well, there's always a risk to a wrong decision, but I always look at that as the offset of the risk to not having a seasoned team when you need it to, right? There's a short-term risk, and I think I watch occasionally, and occasionally I'm very tempted to do it, to go, well, I know the right answer, I'm just going to make the decision. And then you also realize, but that's not allowing your associate who went to Dubai to learn how to be the leader that you need her to be down the road.
I think that's right. And, one thing you learn as you get older is that there's a range of decisions within any one decision.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole range of options you've got in that decision-making process. But what you and I both know is the worst thing to do is to have no decision.
Right.
And it was Alex Ferguson who, after 25 years, was asked on a football interview, how did you always know your decisions were right? And he said, of course I didn't. He said, I just knew that when I thought about something for too long, I had to make a decision. And once I'd made that decision, I had to stick with it. I had to see it through because I couldn't reverse the decision I'd made. And I think that's an important part of leadership, that ultimately you need to obtain the facts, you need to get all the information, and then you need to choose the decision, and then you've got to see it through and execute on it.
So for you, what are some of the hardest types of decisions that you least like to deal with? I'm sure there's some decisions that your instincts just know.
Well, people is the hardest. People are undoubtedly the hardest. I'm a people person. I love people. I love relationships. I get very attached to the people on which I work. I'd like to think I'm very loyal to those people around me. But sometimes you have to make decisions. Sometimes you have to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
And the bigger businesses you run, the bigger decisions you have to make. And in the last 24 months, coming out of COVID, we've merged with another business, a business called Blackbrook, and led by a great guy called Ivy Looma. That requires, gives you leadership duplication issues and across multiple areas. The same in America. Ultimately, you have to make decisions. If you're not happy with something, you can't hide from that decision-making process. But you shouldn't enjoy it. But you've still got to execute on it, and you've got to ensure that you've made as many times as you can the right decision. I'm very proud that, having run people businesses since 1997 now, which is quite a long time, right? I have a lot of relationships with people who have left me and who no longer work with me. And sometimes that's of their volition, but often that might have been my decision. But you can still do that in the right way. When in the early days in the law, I taught myself the mirror test, right? Which is, can you look yourself in the mirror and feel that you've given that person enough runway to prove themselves right or wrong?
Right.
And if I did, and I felt that I could look myself in the eye and say, you know what, you've been decent, but this is not the right environment for them, then best thing for both of you is to say, you know what, let's call it a day. And that can be brutal sometimes. You and I know that. But it still has to be done.
If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to the 32-year-old CEO just taking over a law firm, what would it be?
Life's a long game. I mean, I was in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can imagine, right? I was 32. I wanted to turn the world upside down. If you I go back now, there were profiles, because I became a thing in the London legal industry because I was so young and running a law firm, and there were lots of, and there were lots of, I think there was one about charging around. I remember there was a profile written about me, and so I think if you could learn everything, I've been reading a book recently about how to deal with entering into your, this part of my career in my late 50s, and that there's these curves of the curve of knowledge and instinct that comes through early parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the curve of experience, maybe a little bit more wisdom that comes out later on in your life. And you can't fuse the two.
Right.
It's a very rare human being who has that wisdom that comes from life's learnings in your early 30s. So I think when I look back, I often think, oh my God, I must have been horrendous in my early 30s, But I think the one lesson that you would try and teach to everybody is that life is a long life. It's Warren Buffett who said that you can make money, you can lose money. You can make the money back that you've lost, but you can't lose your reputation. You can lose your reputation in 5 minutes.
Right.
And I think that one of the things I'm proud of is that I would hope that I'd come out of, at this point in time with relatively lengthy career with a stronger reputation than when I started. So I think, the guy in the early 30s wasn't too bad, but maybe just calm down a little bit.
Okay, one last personal question. You make a shift from being a lawyer to getting into the investment industry, specifically in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand the thought process of doing that. That seems incredibly risky to give up a sure thing to enter the real estate industry, but there must have been pros and cons, evaluation that you did.
So I think that people often say to me I'm entrepreneurial. I don't think that's right. I'm not an entrepreneur like the great entrepreneurs of the world, okay? I do have a tolerance for risk, though. I think there's a difference. I think that, I went through .com and then we did phenomenally well through the early 2000s. And then there was tough years, 2001, 2003, tougher years. And then we really built a very, very solid law firm that was performing very, very well. But I was getting bored.
Mm-hmm.
In my body, I knew I was bored. I found the routine of the cycle of the legal year, the quarterlies and the billings and the appraisal processes and managing 90 partners. And I was just found it was becoming routine. And that doesn't mean I didn't love the law. I loved it. But I just thought to myself, you know what? You really should test yourself in other environments. And then you say to yourself, well, how can you do that? So I actually went off and saw a headhunter friend, said, how would you do it? Because lawyers had a certain cachet, certainly in the UK, of not really being commercial animals. So it became an issue of concentric circles. What were the industries in which you felt most comfortable? And the two of those industries, one was media. I was very involved with the Saatchis at the time and advertising, and I ended up on their board after I left the law. But the other one was real estate, and I had a client and a friendship with a man called Gerald Bronson, who was a very important part of my life and a very strong mentor to me. And he turned around to me on one business trip that I went with him to America and said, it was about time that I got myself a proper job. I won't do the impersonation. He'd be upset. So about 10 days later, I rang him up and I said, well, fine, if it's time I got myself a proper job, why don't you give me one? And he went, okay, then. So it started and we sat down and we talked for, I think this was November, and I ended up resigning from the law firm in the February, I think it was. And it was just because in the sporting analogies that, as you may realize, I like to use, I wanted to see if I could cut it in the Premier League.
Right.
I wanted to see where my talents were. I wanted to understand what my potential was, back to my themes of my life, right? What was my potential? Was I capable of doing this? Was I capable of running a business in another environment? And, I went to Heron, which was the property company which Gerald was the CEO of. It's controlled ultimately by the Milken family. And that's a long-term relationship with Michael Milken. And that has connectivities in with Todd Bowley, because they have a very strong relationship, which, again, constant themes of my life, these relationships that are very important to me. And, for the first 12 to 18 months, it was a hell of a transition. But after getting your feet, you think to yourself, okay, you can do this. And that led to me after 5 years saying to Gerald, I love you, but I need to see whether I can do this on my own. And then I went into partnership with Todd, and I guess the rest is...
So it's the same theme again and again.
It is.
Do you have a fear of failure?
Oh, yeah, every day. Every day. Look, when you run a portfolio,
Mm-hmm.
you're only as happy as your least happy child. And I'm blessed with 4 children, 2 sons-in-law, a grandchild now, 9 weeks, but you're only as happy as your least happy child. You lie in bed, irritated and worried about the transaction that doesn't look too good. And trust me, for the last 4 years or so, there have been too many of those in this marketplace. We've all had them. There is no real estate investor who hasn't been lying in bed thinking about those children over the last 4 years. So of course I have a fear of failure. But I've been blessed in my life by having been in business with people who have had my back. And I could not have been more blessed than I've had with Todd and with Tony Manella at Eldridge and the people around them who have supported me. And I really feel going into 2025 that we're on the cusp at Cain of becoming a really substantial business. Now, of course, there are the powerhouses of our industry, and I don't think we'll end up like those, but we have a real opportunity to make waves in the industry and make a difference. And I'm very proud of that journey.
So if you look back on the last 5 years of your life and you consider them a chapter in the story of your life, what would you title the chapter?
Probably survival, if one's honest. It's been a very challenging period for me personally. I lost both my parents. My father died in the first month of COVID, and I guess I've indicated through this conversation how important part of my life they were. My mother passed in April of 23, having lived with my wife and I for most of that period and been very unwell for a lot of it. So that really frames a lot of the last 5 years. Commercially, it's been a challenge. The capital markets have been dead, as I indicated some time ago. So you've had great assets that have been illiquid, but you are beginning to see real core capital come back to the marketplace. And therefore, I think, without having a crystal ball for the future, but I heard Jonathan Gray at Blackstone say something very similar, that the seeds of, a far more active real estate industry you can see coming. Ultimately, that's inevitable because everybody's gravitated towards credit, and we've done really well in the credit world over the course of the last 10 years. We've written $14-15 billion worth of debt, and we've had wonderful results out of that. It's clear what I think the new president of America would want to do with interest rates. So the gap between core capital returns in real estate at 10 to 12% and credit that may be a lot more subdued than that over time will attract the core capital back to the industry, and that will see valuations come back the right way. And look, property is a long-term business. Real estate is a long-term business. So I think, I think that I would say, survival has been the name of the game in very many assets, but I think you're now really beginning to see real opportunity coming into the market where you can buy. We're looking at an asset in New York at the moment, which I think you're going to buy at 30% of replacement cost. And we're going to use it to drive one of our brands.
Right.
So I think that's, an example of the type of asset you're going to see come into the market over the course of the next 12, 24 months. And of course, we're also in the final throes of the final financing of Beverly Hills. And I think that's going to put us in a completely different trajectory. Well, hopefully we close that during the first quarter of 25.
So keeping with the theme of January 1st, if you and I are at this table, January 1st, 2026, what do you hope to be celebrating?
Well, firstly, I hope that we'll be celebrating a successful end for Chelsea for the remainder of the season. And I guess for Todd, I'm hoping that the Dodgers and the Lakers will have had an equally successful year as well. For me, the flagship of our business is the Beverly Hills development. So, we're on a really good path. We're very, very excited by what we're seeing in Beverly Hills, both in terms of the support of the financing community, but also those people who wish to live within the Amman world and occupy and share that environment with us. So I really would hope that we'd be celebrating that. The Delano Hotel will be reopening in the last quarter of 2025, we would hope, or around New Year. So I'm hoping that will be a big celebration. But I think if you look at it in big picture terms, I think, life you learn as you go through it is a series of small steps. There is very few silver bullets in this world whereby, you solve everything with one thing. But I'm hoping that Cain will continue on the trajectory that we've seen and the progress that we've seen over the course of the last few years. And hopefully that reflects on my own position and my own reputation in the, in the industry and the world, because I'm very keen that you leave only one thing behind in this world, and that's your reputation. I think, if you live your life remembering that everything you do, what would it look like on the front page of a newspaper? If I carry on that trajectory and it's going well, then I'll be very happy. Of course, with my family being healthy and successful and prosperous, et cetera, et cetera.
So on the Beverly Hills transaction, like you said, that's a hallmark transaction for you. I'm sure in your position, you look at many, many real estate opportunities, and you probably pass on far more than you ever take on. Do you remember the moment or the reason when the Beverly Hills transaction went from just an idea that crossed your desk to something where you said, I think we're going to do this?
I think it's somewhat different, right? We were investors and quasi lenders into the site. The transformation was Wanda from China selling the slip of land between the Beverly Hilton and the Los Angeles golf course.
Okay.
And that was the moment at which you look at each other, and Todd and I looked at each other with Benny Allergem, our partner at the time, and said, if we could acquire that land, we can do something here that no one else could ever do, because we will own 17, 18 acres of Beverly Hills. And at that point in time, we looked at each other and said, this is one of the most important transactions that could be done in North America over the course of a 10-year period. And I think second to Hudson Yards, probably, it's one of the biggest developments that will have taken place and happened in North America. And the fact that the guy from London's leading it is, it's nice and interesting. But I think that's the opportunity. The first opportunity was a great investment for us to have. It was a good return, et cetera, et cetera. But the transformatory moment was the Chinese company being forced to sell the asset.
That makes sense. I know that you're a political fan. You and I have talked politics before. How much of your political insights are out of raw sport versus business?
What do you mean by raw sport?
Did you just enjoy it? Like you enjoy watching politics like you enjoy watching Chelsea?
No. I would say that it's unrelated to my business world.
Okay.
Completely unrelated. If you ask my wife, when she first met me, she said, what's he going to be? She'd say he's going to be prime minister. He wants to be prime minister. I've always loved politics.
Is that still on the table?
No.
Okay.
No. I like our current prime minister.
Because this would be a great place to announce it if it is.
No, I like our current prime minister. I admire him. But I've always loved politics. I've always loved the thought and the ability to make change for people. And so I've always been fascinated by the characters. I think the more you meet politicians, the more you realize they are a rare breed, that they're a very talented group of people who have a very unusual set of skills to put them in the positions that they are. So I find politics fascinating. And, every decade is different. Every decade brings its new challenges. And there's no doubt that the world in which we sit today is a very dangerous one in terms of politics. The dangers of incumbency are being seen across the whole world, be it in France, be it in Germany. You're seeing the uproar in South Korea that we're seeing from, wild decision-making. And then, of course, America and the decision-making that's been taking place there. And I think if you want to link it back to business, I talked about luxury and I talked about how the rich have got richer. Well, I think that the reverse impact of all of that has been the desire for people who don't feel that they've had benefited from that journey, being attracted to the populist style of populist nature of politics that we're seeing around the world. And obviously, Donald Trump has been a big beneficiary of that process. And clearly in the UK, we've got Nigel Farage who's trying to ride the same wave as you look today. But I think, as we go into 2025, I think the great thing from an American perspective and from a global perspective is that we have clarity. We have clarity. No one can argue that Donald Trump didn't win the election. He deserves to be president of America, and we all hope that he will bring the the level of security and stability that he's been talking about in a geopolitical sense. And I think he won the election ultimately because he provided clarity as to what he was going to do. And when you look at the issues which an American president controls, foreign policy, trade, the border being the biggest ones, where he can effectively execute on those unilaterally, there was no doubt about what he was going to do. He made it very clear to the American people what his policies were. And they chose them. And that's a fine decision. It's a decision that we hope will bring stability to the world. And when you look at this in geopolitical terms, you look at both the situation in Ukraine and obviously the one in the Middle East, there's no doubt that Trump is going to push towards some forms of resolution of both of those, which hopefully will bring us all stability, because the environment in which we've been living has been less than stable and not been good, both in a business term and also on a human level. Too many people have died over the course of the last 3-4 years, and that has to stop.
What politician do you admire most, living or dead?
Well, I've had the benefit of meeting a lot up close over the course of my life. And the one I always admired the most that I met up close was Tony Blair. He has a charisma to light up a room. And, I think he's still tainted by the impact of the Iraq War and the way in which certain sectors of the population perceive that. But I always admired him and liked him and respected his decision-making. Of the politicians that I never met or had never had the fortune of meeting, the person who stands out the most is Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
To go through what he went through and emerge from prison without bitterness, without rancor, and believing in reconciliation, not retribution, in South Africa, is an extraordinary human being. When I was a kid, my teenage years, I was always obsessed by this notion of lack of freedom and how would you feel being incarcerated unjustly? We lived through that period of the Lebanese hostages. In the UK, the famous one was a guy called Terry Waite, who was the aide to the Archbishop of Canterbury. I read all the books about the Soviet prisoners of war, Solzhenitsyn, and I lived through a world of the Jewish refuseniks, people like Sharansky, who were in prison and sent to Siberia, and Sakharov and others. And I was very fascinated and somewhat traumatized in my own head about how I would deal with that. And when I see how Mandela dealt with that, it's an extraordinary way he reacted. And I have to say at the end of that I had the fortune to have lunch with the mother of one of the hostages in Gaza at this point in time. I sat with her at a lunch, a woman called Mandy Dhari. And the strength of character that these people are showing with their children underground somewhere, 400 odd days, is beyond anything that I think I could cope with myself. I hosted an event just 2 weeks ago in my house where a mother and father of a boy who died actually on the 7th of October spoke and showed a film about their boy's life. And you realize then, for every person that's died on all sides of all wars, there's a backstory, there's a family, there's a mother, there's a father, there's grandparents, there's brothers and sisters. So, what I admire leaders who try and see beyond that, try and see that reconciliation and talking is the way forward. One of the great experiences I've had in my business career, bringing it back to my business career, is in about 2008-9, I first visited the Gulf. And I did a tour across Oman, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Riyadh then, and Doha. And my eyes were opened up to a world which I'd never experienced before, and in which I had preconceived notions. Now, with the name Jonathan Goldstein, most people will know I'm Jewish. And I'm happy to talk about it. And one of the great things I've experienced over that 15-year period is the ability to talk to many people of different backgrounds and find common ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that's taught me, maybe as a businessman, but also as someone who likes politics, that the way forward is talking. The way forward is meeting. The way forward is getting on a plane and going and meeting people, sitting and talking about them, hearing what their perspectives are, hearing what their issues are. It's a common theme that we've talked about over the last period, right? Understanding where the other person comes from. We had a situation on a commercial transaction a couple of weeks ago where someone sent me a message that said, if that's the markup that your associate's going to send me, I think we're both wasting our time. And I rang up the person. If he's listening, he'd laugh. And I said, look, don't be silly. But I said, you tell me the two things that are most important to you, and I'll tell you the two things that are most important to me, and I bet you we can solve it in 5 minutes. And we did. And I think, if you took the egos out of the room of most of these people around the world, excluding the fanatics,
Mm-hmm.
who come at it from a different perspective, the world would be a better place.
So back on your business career, if you're giving advice, real estate's an entrepreneurial exercise because people can leave their institutional jobs and start up a real estate firm with pretty low barriers to entry. If you're giving advice to someone in their 30s or 40s who's starting up a new real estate venture today, what would you tell them to focus on, and what pitfalls would you tell them to avoid?
Well, I think the first of all is that to focus on what you're best at. Focus on your strengths and make sure you're in business with people who have got your back and who you can trust. I think if you stick to what you know, stick to what you're best at. Where I've made mistakes, I would say, is where I've steered off straight off those paths. So I think to most people, I would say, stick to what you know, stick to what you're good at and build from there. Take that as a building block.
Right.
And make sure you're in business with people who you trust. You cannot make money if you're in business with a bad person. You and I could own the Taj Mahal, but we'd lose money if we're in business with a bad person. We just would. Ultimately, the world's
Totally
about,
agree. Yeah.
Ultimately, the world's about people.
So in that's phenomenal advice. It's about relationships. As you look at those relationships, how do you, when you meet someone, how do you start to build trust? It's such a hard thing to define.
I think one of my strengths, if I have any, is I have an ability to create relationships with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm ultimately quite a trusting person. So my instinct is that people have come at the world like I come at the world, openly, transparently. And, I'm hoping that people come along that journey with me, but you have to have your antennae. And I think this is part of the wisdom curve or experience curve that I talked about earlier, that not everybody's like that. Not everybody operates in that same sort of way. Not everybody sees the world the way you see the world. So I think you're trying to find those kindred spirits. I come back to it by saying that I talked about Todd and Bowley and Tony Manella, the president of Aldridge, and I've been very lucky. They're both forthright, strong characters, but they're people who you can rely upon. They're people who are not looking to play games behind your back.
Mm-hmm.
And I have not tried to do that for them for 10 years either, 11 years either. And I think that's important. And that's why they're friends as well as business partners. So for me, that's really what you should be looking for.
Good. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. It's really exciting for me to sit down and be able to ask these questions, and I appreciate your candid answers to all of them. Congratulations on your success so far, and best of luck as we look forward.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.